Okay, so today we're going to be doing a method called mark, release, recapture, and we're going to do a calculation called the Lincoln Index, and that's going to be used to estimate the population size of an organism. So today I'm going to try and find out, or trying to estimate rather, how many woodlice there are in this area of my garden. So let's say I need quite a fixed area, so you need to go out to your garden and have a very defined area that you want to sample over. So I've got quite an obvious boundary in this bit of my garden here that I'm going to sample in. So mark, release, recapture can be used really with lots of kind of organisms. It tends to be used for things with some kind of hard shell, like a snail or a grasshopper or a woodlouse, and it's used to estimate how many of those organisms we think are in this area. You can use it on a much bigger scale as well. You could do things like leopards, lions, mice, but you would use a slightly different method that we're going to use today. You would need to trap those animals first in some kind of big trap. So to do this practical, you are going to need some kind of tub, some kind of nail varnish or Tipp-Ex, like old school Tipp-Ex, or maybe even a little bit of paint that you can find in your shed. Plus you're going to need some kind of really, really fine thing to poke the woodlice gently with. So maybe a blade of grass or a tiny, tiny twig, much thinner than the nail varnish brush itself. So what we're going to do in our area is we are going to, in a fixed period of time, so let's say 5 minutes, I'm going to collect as many woodlice as I can into my tub. And you'll generally do that if you look under leaves or logs like this, you'll find lots of woodlice. So if I lift this up, you'll be able to see just how many there are under here. Look at all these little beauties. Okay, so I can put those into my tub. Now we've got to think about this thing called ethics today, which is treating animals with care and respect, because they might just be a woodlouse, but we need to make sure we're not harming them. That would be ethically wrong. So you're going to spend 5 minutes collecting as many woodlice as you can from the whole of this area. So you might want to, like I said, delve under some leaves and stuff. Then you need to mark the woodlouse. So you need to get your nail varnish and you need to put the tiniest little drop on your twig. Now we're trying not to paint the woodlice, we just want to put a tiny, tiny identifiable mark on them. So I've got some nail varnish here. I'm going to put a tiny little pink dot on their back. So you can see on this one here, he's got the teeny tiniest little bit on him. You might not be able to see it on the video, but you can imagine. What I don't want to do is completely block the woodlouse's exoskeleton, because woodlice, if you're one of the A-level students, you know that woodlice do gas exchange through their exoskeleton. It's kind of how they breathe. They have tiny little holes called spiracles. Who don't want to block those because the woodlice would die. Then what we're going to do when we've marked every single woodlouse in my tub, and more importantly counted them, I'm going to put them back into their habitat. So let's say I found 10 within a 5 minute period, because that's just an easy number to remember. The next thing I'm going to do is come back the next day at the same time, ideally with the same weather conditions, and I'm going to spend the same period of time, so maybe 5 minutes again, collecting as many woodlice as I can. And I'm going to count how many were marked and how many were unmarked in that sample. So let's say tomorrow I come back and I find that 1/3 of the woodlice that I find were marked. Then I will go back to my data from yesterday and think, right, if 1/3 of them were marked, that means the sample that I took must represent 1/3 of the entire population. So if I found 20 woodlice on day 1, that means my entire population could be estimated to be 60 woodlice in this area. We are making a few assumptions though about these woodlice and the mark. Have a little think about what those assumptions will be. I'm thinking, what do we assume the woodlice are going to do between day 1 and day 2? How do we assume they're going to behave? Or what are we going to assume that they don't do, more importantly? Pause the video, have a think of some assumptions. So one assumption is, we are assuming that that mark does not harm the woodlouse in any way. It doesn't stop it breathing and so it doesn't die. It doesn't make it more visible to one of the birds that are in the garden, because if you're walking around with a bright orange splodge on you, maybe the birds will come and eat you more. We're assuming that there are no births and no deaths during the 24-hour period, and we're also assuming there's no emigration or immigration from this area. We're also assuming that the woodlice that I marked there will freely intermingle with all the other woodlice in this whole area and spread themselves out well.